Views and news with Clarence Ford.
Share your perspective.
Only on Cape Talk.
It is that half hour. Is it 25 minutes? Well, it's 25 exactly. An interaction time that we have with the naked scientist, Dr. Chris Smith, lecturer at Cambridge University, and he's here every Friday to answer your question. A couple in already, and a warm welcome to Dr. Chris Smith.
Morning, Clarence. You know, I'm actually going to have to start the programme by saying I almost forgot my homework. But thanks to producer Joe, who sent me a WhatsApp this morning just before the programme and said, "Have you done your homework, Chris?" I was chased up and suitably chastened, and I have done my homework. Now, you might remember last week we had this lovely question. We had this lovely question, and I speculated that the answer was it's down to the Romans. Most things are. But I said I will take this away and check because it's such a fascinating question. Now, the question was, who decided that February should be a victim of truncated stature? Why should February get the 28-day short straw and every other month has 30 or 31? Brilliant question. And I said, as I said, I felt it was probably something to do with the Romans initially, but I've been away and had a look. This is what, and I'm going to quote it just to make sure we get everything right. I'm going to quote what they say. It says, the decision for February to have 28 days was made by Numa Pompilius, who was the second king of Rome around 731 BC. He designed the Roman calendar, there's the Romans that I mentioned, to align with the lunar cycles, which required 12 months. To make the calendar a total of 355 days, which is the lunar year, he had to create 1 month with an even number of days. Since the Romans believed that even numbers were unlucky, Numa chose February, which was associated with the rituals of purification, to be the unlucky month with the 28 days. This decision persisted through various calendar reforms, and February's 28 days remain a part of the modern Gregorian calendar. So there you go. It dates back to 731 BC, so it's about 2,500 years old, the concept of February being a month of short stature.
And a product of somebody's imagination, then nothing based on the movements of the planet and the sun and the moon.
Well, of course, the year, which you can't argue with, because we know roughly how long a year lasts, it's 365 days or 366. The reason there's that disparity is because it isn't quite a complete number of days that the Earth takes to go around the sun. That's an unarguable fact, and therefore you have to make whatever calendar you contrive fit into that time, which we notionally call a year. And the other unit of time, of course, is day-night. And the day-night is driven by how long it takes the planet, our own planet Earth, to rotate on its axis. So you therefore have to divide the time it takes the Earth to complete its journey around the sun into a number of those day-night units, which we call a day, 24 hours, give or take. It's actually slightly off that, but that's by the by. And that ends up giving us the calendar we have. If you didn't get your calendar right, you'd end up with the months slipping. And what I mean by that is that we know roughly when summer and winter are supposed to come, taking climate change out of the equation. If you got your calendar wrong, then the months would move and you'd end up eventually with Christmas happening at Easter and winter happening in the middle of what we currently call summer. Although in the UK, you might be forgiven for thinking that happens anyway.
Yeah, and you and I would be a lot younger if we could just deny that. But let's go to Terry. Terry's been holding on. He's on the line from Newlands. Welcome, Terry.
Good morning. Red meat, testosterone, male violence. It's a massive issue in this country. No one is willing to seemingly connect the dots. Discuss.
Hello, Terry. Well, what you're referring to is the fact that if you eat an animal and that animal is male and there's some testosterone, can that testosterone get into you? Can that affect your behaviour? I don't know the answer to that, to be perfectly frank. But what I will say is almost certainly the dietary intake of testosterone from red meat is going to be tiny in comparison to a red-blooded male's own testosterone, assuming no other underlying health complaints, because the amount of testosterone a person will make for themselves is going to be, by and large, the hugest contribution to their testosterone level. If this were not the case, I would say that you'd end up with virilization of young children before puberty, before they make much of their own testosterone. You'd also end up with androstenization, in other words, male features in women who are eating a lot of red meat. We don't tend to see that, so I think that's probably not the major driver. And a person's own testosterone, I would speculate, although I don't know for sure, and if anyone knows better, please do put me right, I would say a person's own testosterone made by their testes is going to be the dominant source of the testosterone signal in a person. And you're quite right to say that testosterone is linked to violence. It does, in high levels, produce mood changes, belligerence. It's more likely to lead to aggressive behaviour. It is the male hormone, and males of pretty much any species we've studied tend to fight, largely over land, territory, females, and so on. Doesn't matter what the species is. There's all kinds of reasons. And much of this aggressive behaviour is linked to testosterone. It's an androgenic, in other words, bodybuilding steroid hormone, which encourages big stature and big muscles, which are therefore there to equip you with an ability to defend yourself. So, yep, it is linked to violent tendencies. But is red meat at the foot of the cause? I don't think so.
We've got a voice note in from, let's take a listen to that voice note, Joe.
Good morning, Clarence and Dr. Smith. Clarence, you mentioned Grok and what happened to Elon Musk. I suppose Dr. Smith, with his vast knowledge and curiosity, would have explored some of these AI LLM models. Dr. Smith, what is your view on what's the best? And I know it might be ambiguous because it depends on what you want to do. I mean, these things can do some degree of coding and so on. And if you'd be so kind to answer in respect of the free tier models, we're from South Africa, so we don't necessarily have dollars to pay for it.
So my view on these large language models and best, worst, and so on. Well, to be honest with you, I mean, I'll talk generically and generally about them. What these things do is act as an assistant. They are not a replacement for human intelligence or human endeavour. You have to be really careful with what these artificial intelligences do, because they will trip you up. I am very, very cautious. When I read something that they output and generate, I check it very, very carefully. I've seen for myself one of the biggest fallbacks and downfalls with these things is that they have a tendency to confabulate. Some people could use the word hallucinate. That's not right. It's actually confabulation. They make things up. We demonstrated this at my hospital the other day, where we asked ChatGPT, I think, to come up with a list of eponymous syndromes, diseases named after people who either died of them or discovered them, or both in some cases. It invented one right in front of our eyes, a disease none of us had ever heard of, named after some random physician none of us had ever heard of. When we researched it, we found no, it didn't exist. It just invented it. Now, if we're not careful, we will end up with people who will take as read what they read on a screen. They will repeat it to other people who will learn it. It will end up being parroted all over the internet. And then when people go searching to check these things and check if they're factually accurate, they might then find references to these confabulations and think, well, other people have said it. It must be true. And before we know it, we are doing the equivalent of plastic pollution in the present time. We're creating long-term legacy effect poisoning of the knowledge well, and we have to be really, really careful about this. These things can be very, very useful. They can provide you with a steer towards how to do something, but if you are not careful, they will bias you. We're seeing university applications, for example, are dropping personal statements now, because what was happening is pretty much everybody was asking one of these large language models, write me a personal statement for an application to medical school and explain why I'm the ideal candidate for the job. And you just get a whole load of computer-generated claptrap, and they're all the same. One of my friends who interviews for one of the world's best universities, he's an engineer, and he told me he is being very, very careful about how he sets example questions for his interviews now. He used to sit candidates down, give them examples, engineering problems and maths problems to solve. He said it's very, very quickly you start to see your own questions cropping up on the internet. And he said because you're doing remote interviews, you can see people off camera are typing the questions into large language models and then getting answers that they then repeat and parrot in the interview. So that's not helping anybody, because it's a substitute for real human ability and endeavour. So use it with caution. Use it to make your life more productive. If it does help you to generate a bit of code or something, that's great. But do not regard this as a replacement for education and training your own brain to work in a really well optimized way, because that is what will carry you through life. If you end up totally dependent on this sort of technology, it might potentially close that very important window early in life when we have all the abilities to do our best learning and have our best ideas, and we end up totally dependent on a computer screen and lose the ability to think properly for ourselves. I'm using some hyperbole here, exaggerating slightly, but I think the risks are real.
Absolutely. Ivan says, "Good morning. I've been diagnosed with macular degeneration. Please tell me more about this. Can a person go blind from it?"
Oh, hi, Ivan. Sorry to hear about this. It's very, very common, and it refers this condition to the macula, which is the light-sensitive, really light-sensitive spot on the back of the retina. When you look at somebody's face, you watch the television or you read a book, your eyes are focusing the light from that page on that bit of your retina. It is the part of the retina that sees in the greatest detail. And over time, this begins to degrade or degenerate. We begin to lose the light-sensitive cells there. And this is for two reasons, what we call wet or dry macular degeneration. If you have the wet form, this is associated with conditions like diabetes. For some reason, usually because parts of the retina run out of oxygen, the retina starts to grow new blood vessels to try to pep up the oxygen supply. And unfortunately, those new blood vessels tend to be fragile, brittle, and prone to rupture. And this leads to hemorrhages across the retina and the deposition of other muck, which together poison the photoreceptors, the light-sensitive rods and cones, and this leads to a progressive deterioration in vision, specifically the central vision, the most accurate vision, and this can rob people of the ability to see clearly things like faces, the television, and read books. So unfortunately, people can go blind in the respect that they lose that really high functional part of their vision, but there are lots of things, fortunately, we can do about it. Number one, a good thing is you've found out about it. Finding out about it means that you can have it investigated, you can have the causes, the underlying causes investigated and mitigated. And there are various things that can be done now, including laser therapies and also certain injections that can be put into the eye, which can reduce the rate at which these new blood vessels form and which the hemorrhages or the muck builds up, and that can slow down the disease. There's another form called dry macular degeneration. It's a slightly different cause why that one happens, but there are also important things that can be done in both cases. So getting to the bottom of why it's happening, and you need to see an ophthalmologist for that, and then taking steps to make adjustments so that you can continue to enjoy as much as you can of what you do and what you rely on your eyes for. That's really important.
Then we have a voice note in from Alan. Let's take a listen.
Good morning, everyone. Here's a shocker for Dr. Chris. Why on earth have some very, very clever men and women completely missed the point about the Big Bang universe? Fred Hoyle was correct. Occam's razor is the proof. The Big Bang theory is far too complicated. I'll be listening on the radio. Thank you so much. It's Alan in Fishhook.
I'm not really sure what the question was. What was Alan asking?
I think he contests or questions the origin of the universe, the Big Bang theory.
Yeah, I'm not the best person to ask because at the end of the day, we only can go on what we can see. And our current best guess of how the universe popped into existence was some kind of Big Bang. And we have pretty good evidence that something like this must have happened. The evidence is, if you wind the clock back, or if you make observations like Hubble made, we can see an expanding universe. That's what Hubble, and that's why the Hubble Space Telescope was named after Edwin Hubble, because it was able to test some of the hypotheses about the expanding universe. Hubble's breakthrough was to see that the universe was growing, and the farther back in time we looked, the faster it appears to have been growing today compared to then, arguing that it's speeding up. And other important breakthroughs, including the discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation, the afterglow of this Big Bang, with radiation coming to us from all directions equally, of light stretched out, arguing that the universe is inflated. Bringing all this together with the idea that the universe is still growing, if you've got something that's getting bigger, then if you run time backwards, it would get smaller. When you bring all these arguments together, you arrive at a point basically about 13.8 billion years ago, when we think that the universe appeared to begin existing. And although we can't see back to then, we can see to periods very, very close to then. And this enables us to model how the universe would have behaved or been behaving, and then go back even further than that. And our current best guess is that the origin of the universe is some kind of very intense release of energy about 13.8 billion years ago. This caused a very rapid inflation in fractions of a second of this notional universe. This expansion leads to cooling. This cooling enables the formation of particles because the energy and mass are interchangeable, E equals mc squared. You then end up with particles. Those particles can then begin to form atoms. Those atoms can be hydrogen, chiefly, some helium, a little bit of lithium, and they then enable the formation of stars, the first big stars, very, very soon, maybe 300,000 or 400,000 years after the Big Bang. So very, very soon after the universe forms, you start to get stars. Those stars are in primitive galaxies, and then we begin the whole process of universe and galactic evolution that we see today. And so we can run that clock backwards, and that's our best guess at the moment about how this universe popped into existence. But because no one was there at the time, and it's very difficult to see back any further than about 300,000 years after the Big Bang, which is our current limit of what we've been able to see, beyond that really is speculation.
Let's get a Keith a voice note in.
I'd like to know what determines the speed of the internet, that we scream off or that the internet works at. What determines it, or how do you speed it up? Thank you very much.
The internet is, it stands for interconnected network. The internet is a distributed network of computers, and those computers, some of them are called routers, and those routers talk to each other using addresses which send information called packets all over this interconnected network with addresses tacked onto those packets of information. So when I go on the internet, my computer has an address. It's called an IP address. And it says, I want a piece of information X from this website. It looks up where that website is, and that website will sit on a computer somewhere, a server, and a request will be sent from my computer to that server saying, please send me this information. That server will break up the information, a bit like if I had a picture, I could cut it up into lots of little pieces, send each little piece across the network, and then when they arrive at my end, my computer can put all the little pieces back together to rebuild the original picture, as it were. Now that's how the internet's doing it, and it's sending all that information over a range of different routes, via different routes all over the internet. They're all arriving at various rates, and it's very redundant in the sense that it's fail-safe. Because you're using lots of different routes across the internet, you're able to make sure that the traffic always arrives. And every time it gets a bit of information, my computer sends back to the server that sent it an acknowledgement going, thanks for that, got that bit, now send me the next bit. This is all going on very, very quickly. But that traffic data has to flow across the internet, and it flows from wherever the server is with the information on it to servers near to you, and then from servers near to you down whatever connection you've got to your device. And all of these processes involve handshakes, yes, no, thank yous between different computers, and as that's going on it takes time because there's traffic going backwards and forwards. Much of it is sent by fibre optic, and that means you're limited by the speed of light. But fibre optics are sending pulses at very, very high rates. So they're transmitting data along the fibre optic, but that does inherently limit the speed. But then most of the constraint is the connection to your own device. Because if you're on a copper wire, which many people still are using broadband on copper wire, the data rate, the amount of information you can pack into the signals, because that's microwaves coming down the copper wire, is limited. So therefore, you are limited by your local connection. But the internet backbones, which do the really, really high-end transmissions, they're very, very fast, as in terabit speeds. But when it gets down near to your house, you're down to megabit in some awful cases, or worse. And in some cases, people are using satellite internet, and that has a delay because the information has to go up to space, tens of thousands of kilometres, and then back down again to the Earth. And that all takes a very long time. And that also limits the rate at which the information can arrive.
Henry Valloon says, I'm prone to developing kidney stones. Is it safe to drink citro soda daily to prevent them from forming?
It depends what's causing your kidney stones, to be perfectly honest with you. The commonest ones are calcium stones. They are commonly caused by smoking, poor diet, age is a big risk factor, and anatomical problems with the kidneys and infection. So if you are prone to this happening, you need to get investigated to find out why this is occurring in you. And one way you can make sure that you minimise the risk of more stones forming or worsening is to make sure you don't get dehydrated, because that will affect the urine flow through the kidney, which also is going to be a risk factor if it's already abnormal. So if this is a common thing for you and you don't know why it's happening, I would definitely get it investigated, because there may be a reversible cause for why this is happening. But don't, whatever you do, self-medicate without actually taking advice from whoever's looking after your kidney problem, or get some advice and then find out what the best way to manage the problem is. Better not to self-medicate in case there are any interactions with other things you're taking, or there's some underlying metabolic thing that might be made worse by doing something you think or you've heard is a good idea. It might upset the apple cart.
And I think we'll squeeze in this last question from Lisa. In Aurora immune disease, is it a random occurrence that an autoimmune system attacks a particular part of the body, example, the thyroid?
Right. Hello, Lisa. Well, an autoimmune condition is a condition in which the immune system turns on your own tissue. Our immune system is programmed to tell friend from foe, and it's normally exquisitely good at telling us apart from the things that shouldn't be in our body. But for various reasons, occasionally this process can go wrong. One reason it can go wrong is if we get infections. And you mentioned the thyroid, and this can happen quite commonly with the thyroid. People who get an infection, and common colds can do this, can sometimes find that the immune system subsequently turns on their thyroid, sometimes for a short time, sometimes for longer. We think that in certain contexts, cold viruses and similar viruses can present to the immune system bits of the cold virus that look a bit like the body's own tissue. So in fighting off the cold virus, an immune response is inappropriately developed in some people that accidentally also begins to recognize our own tissues. And another example of this happening is type 1 diabetes. Children get this most commonly. They get it at a certain time of their life, and they get it at a certain time of year more commonly. This seasonality strongly suggests to us that there's a link to a viral infection, which we think primes the immune system in some vulnerable individuals to get an immune attack on their pancreas that causes type 1 diabetes. So usually what happens with this, with any kind of autoimmune condition, is because the immune response is very, very specific for the thing it will go after, it will tend to focus its efforts on one particular organ or tissue, because that's where the thing that the immune response has been targeted against is based, because the cells in our bodies are not all identical. There are 37 trillion cells in an average adult human, and they break down into a few hundred different cell types, and different organs have different cell types, and those different cell types are running different genetic programs that make different proteins or chemicals that are in that organ or in that tissue. And because the immune response is so specific, it will tend to focus its efforts on one particular target, which tends to, by and large, crop up in one particular organ system, whether that's the thyroid, the pancreas, or if you're unlucky enough to have rheumatoid arthritis, for example, it could be the material inside your joints.
And that's where we have to wrap it, our interaction weekly, just after 9:30 on a Friday, with the Naked Scientist, Dr. Chris Smith, lecturer at the University of Cambridge, bringing the time to nearly, in fact, 2 minutes to 10. Natalie Malcha standing by with news at the top of the hour.